Hi there, I'm Joel, and I'm going to talk about doing data science in the time of ChatGPT. So this is actually a talk I gave at a meetup last week, and a number of people asked if it would be recorded, and it was not recorded, but I figured I could just record my own version, and then you'd have a recorded version. You don't get the laugh track of all the people who were at the meetup, but you can fill that in yourself. So my name is Joel. I'm an engineer at a startup called Flatfile. We build a platform for data interchange. You should check it out. It's good. Previously, I had a bunch of engineering and or data science roles at Goldman Sachs, Capital Group, Allen Institute for AI, Google, a bunch of startups, so on and so forth, a lot of places. I wrote a couple books. One is an O'Reilly book called Data Science from Scratch. One is a book about FizzBuzz. These are not actually the covers for either of them. These are AI generated covers that are actually better looking than the covers for either of them. Although you can see on the data science one, even when you get kind of gaseous abstract hands, they still have extra fingers, which I thought was kind of interesting. But you should check the books out too. They're good. I lived most of my life, or my adult life anyway, in Seattle until a couple of years ago when I moved to Texas. Now I live just outside San Antonio. It's nice here. That's kind of how I dress now. Not today, but if I were leaving the house, that's how I might dress. And so I'm going to talk about doing data science in the time ChatGPT. Okay, so talk about that. Should probably talk about what is data science. And you can't give a data science talk if you don't have Drew Conway's Venn diagram, which clearly states that I'm actually not going to go through it. This is just sort of a joke. I assume that if you're watching this, you know what data science is, and if not, then you can look it up, but I'm not going to tell you. But what is ChatGPT? So probably you know what ChatGPT is. It's a new large language model you can chat with, and it's smart. So when I talk about ChatGPT here, I'm mostly talking about it in sort of an extended sense, meaning any sort of large language model that you interact with, not just the one that says ChatGPT at the top. So, that includes the one that says ChatGPT at the top. Here's an example where I asked it, why should data scientists not learn about ChatGPT? And it, came up with some arguments. You might want to specialize somewhere else. You might not have time or resources, et cetera, et cetera. So, whatever you ask, it'll try and answer, unless it's something it's not allowed to answer, which happens a fair amount. I'm also, when I say ChatGPT, I also mean the OpenAI API, which, you can use to build things on top of. Here, I used a curl command to ask it to write a poem about a data scientist who refuses to use ChatGPT. And it came up with one. It's actually quite a bit longer than this, but it didn't fit on the slide. But I don't claim to be a judge of poetry. I don't know that this is a good poem, but it's a poem. I'm also talking about open source models. So here's, Llama 2, 13 billion. I asked it to write me a limerick about a data scientist who refuses to use ChatGPT. It wrote me a limerick with the caveat that it seems to think that ChatGPT rhymes with apt, like it's pronounced chat-japped or something, which is, kind of charming. I may start saying it that way, but, it can do it too. So, and I'm even including to some degree things like GitHub Copilot, which are looking at your code and trying to write more code for you. So here, I give it a doc string that said writes a rhyming poem about data scientist with a given name, refuses to use ChatGPT for the given reason. So it's not really a poem, and it's certainly not rhyming, but it, morally it's in the right direction, that it's doing something. So, fair enough. It's not what it's trained to do. So it's not that surprising that it doesn't want or doesn't really do it. So basically, any kind of model where you just put lots of text into it and get lots of text out of it, just don't be that guy and throw yourself into it. That seems like a bad idea. And I'm not going to talk about how ChatGPT works. I'm not going to talk about how transformers work. I'm not going to talk about how language modeling works. I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. It's interesting and it's worth learning about. But this is more about like what do these tools mean for data science and for you as a data scientist. And so, if you want to learn how they work, that's admirable, and please go do it, but that's not what I'm going to talk about here. So ChatGPT itself came out less than a year ago, in November 2022. It's mid-November 2023 right now. So it's been out less than a year. And, it feels like it's been out for a long time because it's changed a lot of things. But, I've been doing NLP for quite a while now. I was doing NLP before any of the Transformer stuff, before any of the BERT stuff. And, when BERT came out and when these transformer models came out, there was this feeling among, my colleagues who do NLP that, wow, this is like a real change in the way things work and how good we are at solving these NLP problems. But it never really like expanded much beyond that. But this was like 4 days after ChatGPT came out last year. I went to an event up in Austin with a bunch of people, tech people, investors, whatever, not NLP people, but tech people, investors, futurists, whatever. And ChatGPT was what people were talking about. 4 days after it came out, and there was a real sense of like, this changes things, and this breaks things, and we should be thinking a lot about how this changes things and how this breaks things. Now that it's a year later, I think we were mostly right, to be honest. So, let me take you back and talk a little bit about what it was like to do data science in the before time, so before ChatGPT, so that you can really understand like what it's like doing it, in the time of ChatGPT. So a long time ago, probably like 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, I worked at a startup called Faircast. It was an online travel site, and the sort of magic sauce was price predictions. So, you'd say, I need to fly from San Antonio to Atlanta on these dates, and it would tell you the lowest price is $250, and we think prices are going up, so you should buy now, or we think prices are going down, so you should wait. So this was sort of a very early sort of customer-facing machine learning type startup. Super interesting, really cool stuff. This is what web design looked like back then. It sort of looks different from now, but this is how websites looked. We used to underline links and have square boxes to type into and everything. This was 15 plus years ago. So it was before TensorFlow, it was before PyTorch, it was before even scikit-learn, right? And so how did you do machine learning then? Well, we had a team of what we call data miners. They were PhDs in computer science, and they built their own machine learning frameworks in C++ for doing gradient boosted trees. And they ran them on SunGrid engine, and lots of bespoke tools and bespoke processes, and that's what you had to do back then, which was cool and interesting, and it worked. But the problem was that when things went wrong, you couldn't do much, right? I mean, you either had to go into the source code and debug it yourself, or you had to ask one of the data miners who wrote the library, like, why is this not working? Or you had to dig through the SunGrid engine documentation, or so on and so forth. But there was not a good way to there weren't great ways to get help in general, and especially not on these proprietary tools that were only used by, you and your colleagues. And so it was a little bit daunting to, try and figure out what's gone wrong. And so, a few years after that, I was working at a startup called Volumetrics. We were doing analytics on enterprise collaboration data. So we'd look at, go into your company, look at who emails whom, who meets with whom, how often, what topics, whatever. And then we build a giant hairball out of it and show it to you, because for whatever reason, people really liked these hairballs. And so, I was leading data science at this startup, but I didn't really have that much of a good idea of what I was doing. And so invariably I would keep running into problems that I didn't really know how to solve. And now, at that point we had some scikit-learn, we had some documentation, so we weren't like completely, on our own, but it was still the kinds of help you could get were limited to some degree. And so, you'd run into a problem and you're like, okay, this isn't working for me. And you're the data science team, so there's not really anyone else to ask for the help, and you get kind of stuck. But this was a time where the internet sort of allowed you to put your problem in a bottle and send it off into the void, and hopefully someone would respond. So, here I ran into something I couldn't figure out. So I asked on Stack Overflow, and someone was nice enough to answer on Stack Overflow. Now if you have a problem, you go to Stack Overflow, and it's probably been asked like 20 other times, and someone will very quickly tell you, you idiot, someone's already asked this question 20 other times. And so why did you ask it again? Go read one of those other answers. Back in the day, that wasn't the case. And instead you asked it and hoped that someone would answer it for you eventually. And they did, and then you could get unstuck. But, that could take several days or a week or whatever. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but, we got things done. And then, the data science gold rush happened, let's say. Everyone wanted to be a data scientist. Everybody, went to a boot camp or did a training or did a master's program or this or that. And as part of that, someone somewhere decided to give the advice, hey, you're a data scientist, you should write a blog. You should write a blog. Every data scientist should blog. Writing a data science blog is one of the most important things any aspiring data scientist should be doing regularly. And so, the result of that is that the internet very quickly filled up with blogs about data science of varying, let's say, a varying quality and of varying usefulness. But the good part is that you get to sift through all of them, whether they have high quality or are useful or not. So let's say you want to look at, you want to learn about transformer models. I said I'm not going to talk about them, but maybe you want to learn about them. And just to scope things down, let's just see what are people saying on the site towards datascience.com, which is where a lot of data science blogs are. And sure enough, here's 4 results. There's a lot more than 4 results. And you're sort of overwhelmed. And to be clear, I'm not saying any of these results are bad. Maybe they're all good. But it's very hard to know which ones are good and which ones are bad. One is intuitively and exhaustively explained. One is understanding them the data science way. One is the A to Z, everything you need to know. One is understanding them. So, I don't know which one of those is the right one for me. And I don't really have time to read like 100 blog posts on transformers. I just want to know what I want to know. And so, this is a little bit, it's a little bit tough, right? Like, what do I do? I'm sort of drowning this information. Google's going to give them to me in some order, but I don't know what that order is. And I don't really know how to choose one. Maybe my questions are answered by half by one, half by another. It's a little bit much. And, similarly, you might like want to know, how do I do something in code, right? Like, Python, how do I find the smallest value in a list? Well, there's a bunch of, let's call them SEO sites that, here's Geeks for Geeks, Python program to find the smallest number in a list. Here's Tutorials Point, here's W3 Schools, here's Ask Python, here's Real. So, everyone and, his brother and his sister has some kind of SEO website where they can load it up with articles about how to find the smallest value in a list. And again, you kind of have to sift through them and figure out which one is useful, which one works with your version of Python, which one, et cetera, et cetera. So this can also be a little bit overwhelming, and especially if you just want the official documentation, it can be hard to find, and sometimes it feels like a bunch of toddlers yelling at you. And finally, let's say you have some kind of NLP problem you want to solve, like text summarization or something. Well, there's this amazing resource called Hugging Face where people share models and they have code and everything. But there's also 400,000 models there. And so if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, again, it can be overwhelming. And now, to be clear, like having Hugging Face is an incredible improvement over 5 years before not having it. But at the same time, it can be a pretty overwhelming resource, and choosing one model versus another model. I mean, each model has a card, but you can't click on 400,000 model cards and read them and compare them. That's a little bit much. So, that's a challenge as well. And so this is kind of where things, stood in some ways before ChatGPT. So now, how does ChatGPT change any of this? How does ChatGPT change data science? How does it change doing data science? Well, there's sort of two broad strokes that I'll talk about. One, which is not really the point of this talk, but I'll go into it a little bit, is what I'll call ChatGPT as a solution. So there, what I mean is you are using ChatGPT, you're building some sort of data science product using ChatGPT. So I'm going to, use ChatGPT to deliver something to, my customers or my users or so on. So here's an example. This is something that I built relatively quickly. It's a text analysis dashboard. You enter the text you'd like to analyze. And so I put in the lyrics from China Grove. And if I click analyze text, all right. Anyway, the music is not part of the app, and the pictures are not part of the app either. But if I analyze text, I get some sentiment analysis, and it says the sentiment of this text is one of pride and nostalgia. And then if I also get a summary. It says the song is about the people of a small town near San Antonio, Texas. They are proud of their heritage and the town they come from, which is called China Grove. The song paints a picture of the town waking up in the morning and the people getting ready for another day. So, is this a product you could sell to people? Probably not, but I built it in a few minutes anyway. And I have the app actually up and running over here. So, I have TSL Eats the Wasteland just here to use for stuff. And so if I punch that in and click analyze text, it will analyze it. And it says, April's the cruelest month. So the sentiment of this text is melancholic. And the summary is this text is a poem about the cycle of life and death. It begins in April when the land is coming back to life. It moves through winter and summer before ending with a reflection on childhood and freedom. The poem also touches on themes of memory, desire, and the passage of time. So that's, that's not too bad. So here's another app, which is pretty simple. It's a language learning companion. So you choose what language you want to learn, and you type a message in English, good morning, how are you? And you click translate, and it comes back with actually, I don't know enough Klingon to know if that's actually right, but it looks sort of like my mental caricature of how Klingon looks. So let's say that it's doing mostly the right thing. And again, I've got this up and running. I've got Wasteland. And so, if I paste in and say, translate in Spanish, we'll do it and say, Abril es más cruel, whatever. So that seems right. The one that's a little bit more fun is if I do bird speak and I say, translate that. And says, chirp, chirp, April is the harshest month, bringing forth lilacs, splitting memories and desires, blah, blah, blah. It actually didn't do very much translation, chirp, chirp. It gives you slightly different results every time. So sometimes you can get better results out of it. Quee, April ease. I don't know what that is. It's some sort of like pigeon or something. Pigeon, get it? Bird speak? I don't know. Anyway, let's try one more. Chirp, chirp, April, chirp, chirp, cruelest chirp, chirp, reading chirp, chirp out of the dead land, mixing chirp, chirp, and chirp, chirps. Right. So this one, this one's kind of fun. This is what I kind of expected to do. But anyway, so that's, another way. Obviously, people are probably not going to pay for that either, but, it's a little data science project I built using the OpenAI API. And finally, this review star predictor, where the idea is you punch in or you type in a Yelp review and it predicts how many stars that Yelp review is. So this is a review of Mary's Tacos, which is a local tacos place. It says scrambled eggs taste like powdered eggs, not good. Best thing was tortillas. So many better choices in the area. And if you predict that, it predicts 1 star. And I think that was actually a 1-star review. So it was, not very good. And, if I go there and I punch in, I don't have a Yelp review handy, but I have, again, my T.S. Eliot poem handy, and it predicts 4 stars. So, I guess this is a good review of April. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it's a review of, but yeah, I don't know. So, the first two, the one that's like sentiment and summary, and the second one, which is translation, those feel to me like pretty good uses of ChatGPT. The third one, where it's like predicting how many stars should this review be based on the text, doesn't feel to me like a good use of a generative language model. There's like much more simpler, direct ways to do that. And so that's why I said on LinkedIn, part of my job involves using ChatGPT. Part of my job involves convincing people not to use ChatGPT, because there's a lot of things you can do with ChatGPT that you probably should do in other ways, and for various reasons will be better served doing it in other ways. So that as you like explore this process, so I want to build some data science things in ChatGPT, that's just a good thing to keep in mind is, maybe ChatGPT is not the best way to build this. And a lot of times it actually isn't. And part of that's because OpenAI will take all your money. So, it's expensive to build things that way. So you got to pay for each call if you use their API. Obviously not if you run your own open source version. And also, if you build something, they might implement it as the next new feature once they see that it catches on. So, something else to worry about. So I think what's more interesting to me and what I'd rather like focus on is this idea of using ChatGPT as an assistant. So whatever you're already doing with data science and data science adjacent to data science, whatever, how can you use ChatGPT and similar tools to make you better at it, to make you more effective at it, and to, produce better outcomes. So one thing that it's actually pretty good at is ideation and prototyping. So, got to come up with an idea. So, here I asked it, what's a good idea for a simple data science app that uses Streamlit and the OpenAI API? And it said, that could be both educational and practical. Why not a sentiment analysis and text summarization dashboard? Sound familiar? So, seems like a good idea. And so then I said, hey, can you write the code for this? And it said, certainly. And so it gave me the code for it. And, lo and behold, we ended up with a text analysis dashboard app. ChatGPT wrote the code for it. I tweaked it a little bit, minor tweaks here and there, but all in all, it was probably about a 5-minute process to get it up and running. Assuming you already have an OpenAI API key set somewhere. So, if you have to write a talk and give an example of something you can build on top of ChatGPT, you can use ChatGPT to ideate over it. And so now I said, give me a totally different idea for a totally different app, still OpenAI and Streamlit. Said, certainly. How about an interactive language learning companion? All right, I'll try that. Sure, why not? And of course, I said, write the code for me. And it wrote the code for me. I don't know if that's the best model to pick, but whatever. I took it. I added some languages to the select box. It did not offer me Klingon or Birdspeak as choices, but I added them myself and again made a few other tweaks. And that's how we ended up with chirp, chirp, April, chirp, chirp, whatever. So again, probably spent about 5 minutes on that one as well. And then this one, actually, I did not ask ChatGPT about. Instead, I thought, what's an example that is similar in flavor to these, but represents something that is probably not best built using a generative language model. And so then I just took the text summarizer and changed it a little bit. So again, that was probably another, 5 to 10 minutes worth of work. I probably spent more time than that making the picture of the guy who's unhappy with his tacos. So, yeah. So, ideation, you just want to come up with like dumb ideas. It's actually pretty good for that. You can also use it as a personalized tutor. So this is, a nice thing to use it for. Let's say, we sort of talked about this before. Let's say you want to learn about transformers, right? And so again, we have this situation where, every person who wants to, become a data scientist has gone and written a blog post about transformers. And therefore there's a lot of blog posts about transformers, and who knows which one is true and which one is helpful and which one is useful for you and which one answers your questions. Or you can go to ChatGPT and ask it, what are transformer models in data science? It says transformer models in data science refer to a type of deep learning models from this paper, etc. And here are the key characteristics. Attention mechanisms, layered structure, positional encodings, and so on and so forth. So that's fine. Like, that's probably not different than what you're going to find in most blog posts written about it. So, you haven't gained that much other than, no pop-up ads or things like that. But what's really interesting and kind of exciting is that you can drill down and ask more questions, right? So you say, what's a good analogy to help me understand how they work? It says, these things are actually complex. So let's use the analogy of a cocktail party. And so, imagine you're at a cocktail party, and then it analogizes self-attention as listening skills. Positional encoding is the timeline of conversations, layered structure is multi-level understanding. So is this a perfect analogy? It's not, but I think it's interesting, and it's helpful in some ways. And, from here you can drill down as well and say, tell me more about positional encoding, or I don't get how positional encoding is like keeping track of conversations. And it will keep going and allow you to drill down on exactly the things that you're not understanding or you need help on. So that's actually, that's actually a really exciting usage to me. I mean, in some ways I'm too old to learn a lot of new things, but like if I were, a kid or whatever and trying to learn about algebra or calculus or, anything, tech wars, that would be super amazing. You can also use it as an interactive reference. So what do I mean by that? Well, we had this example, Python, find the smallest value in a list. Now we have all these SEO pages that, offer varying degrees of helpfulness in their own context, not in my context. But what you can do instead is type it in ChatGPT, find the smallest element of a list in Python. To find the smallest element of a list in Python, you can use the min function. Here's a simple example. Boom. So no, no cruft or whatever, just here's what it is. So again, you're probably going to find something pretty similar on any of those SEO pages. So it's not like a huge deal. Where it becomes more interesting and more exciting again is, okay, I tried what you said and I got an error. The error says value error, min arg is an empty sequence. And now, you could Google that error and it's going to tell you something generic about like how that error comes up. But that Google result is not going to remember the context of your original question, what you asked, whereas ChatGPT is, right? So it says, this occurs to handle this situation. Here's how you do it. Here's an example. And so, let's say I try what they say, and now I get another error, type error less than not supported between instances and string and int. So like here, if I say min arg is an empty sequence, even if I Google that, I'm probably going to find things that say, oh, you tried to take the min of an empty list. Like that's how that's going to arise. So it's not too much of a departure. This one though, if you Google that, it's going to say, you tried to compare two things you shouldn't. But here you're not the one who tried to compare them. You just called min on a list. And so ChatGPT is going to say, occurs when you try to use the min function on a list that contains both string and integer elements. It tells you some ways to resolve this. And it even gives you an example of here's how you might handle this by converting all elements to strings. And it uses this min whatever key equals string, and so on and so forth. So that's good because it sort of solved the problem in the context where you needed to solve it. But you can even go one step further and just say, wait, what does key equals stir mean? How does that work? And it will go into, here's what key does, here's what happens, and here's a breakdown of how it works in pretty elaborate detail. And so that's actually that's a pretty magical way to kind of solve problems and debug things and like become better at Python and become better at coding. I think that's something that you couldn't really have done, a year ago, right? A year ago, you would have been stuck, find one web page for your first problem, find one web page for a second problem, find a third web page for your explanation, and hopefully you can sort of like glue them all together in your head. And so this use of it is sort of this, again, interactive reference that really allows you to drill down, is something, once you get used to making it part of your toolkit, that can really change how you work. If you're like a data science master student or boot camp or whatever, you can use it as a homework doer. Don't tell anyone I told you to do that, but you can. This one is interesting. You can use ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever as a pair programmer, and I do this a lot, and I've been programming a long time. But I've been programming a long time, but not long enough to have memorized the Pandas API, because no one has memorized the Pandas API. But GitHub Copilot, has. And so if I say I need to load data into a Pandas data frame, it knows that function is pd.read_CSV, not load CSV or from CSV or whatever. And it suggests it mostly correctly, right? And here, it's not what this talk is about, but you can see that it's using the type annotation. So I'm a big, use type annotations in Python or whatever. And here's another reason why, in that without saying I want a Pandas data frame as my result, it's not going to be able to write this function for me. But by saying load data returns the Pandas data frame, GitHub Copilot knows, okay, I probably need to use Pandas read CSV or similar. And now, I want to choose a delimiter. Well, it knows how to get those extra parameters in there as well. And so that happens for me. But where it starts to get really exciting is, I want to do more complex logic. And so I just put in the doc string, right? So this is my load data function. It loads data from a CSV file. It makes sure that all the column names start with capital letters. And in the salary column, it fills missing values with 0. So, I obviously loading the data frame same as before, but now it does the manipulation I asked for to the columns. It fills the NAs in the salary, and it returns the data frame. So, again, I could have tried to dig through the Pandas API or, tried to memorize it or whatever, but it knows it, and it saved me a bunch of time, and hopefully it's right. And now, I want to write a test for my load data function. And so it starts writing a test. And, this test looks like it's just by saying test load data, it starts writing the code for a test. The test seems sort of reasonable, except that as a first step, it's trying to load data from a file that I know doesn't exist. And so that's not going to work. And so, I ignore that suggestion and put a comment that says first create a temporary CSV file. And it does that. And then it writes a test based on that temporary CSV file, which is quite nice. And then I run the test and it doesn't pass. And it doesn't pass because there's extra spaces. So I can figure that out and fix it, and then it passes. And then I start writing another test, and it looks at my code and says, okay, well, you have this logic for missing values, so maybe I will write a test for that. And it saw that last time I wanted to create a temporary CSV file, so it will do that too. And make sure there are no empty. I added that comment before as well. So, okay, it'll write the test here. And boom, this is a test that, if the salary was missing, we were supposed to replace it with 0, I think. So, wow, it wrote this test for me. That's awesome, because writing tests can be a pain, and sometimes you don't want to do it, but you should do it. But then I run the test and I get assert 2000 nan equals 20 none, use v to get more diff. So I don't know what that means. So now I'm a little bit stuck, right? And so what I do is I just take that back to ChatGPT. I post in a few lines of code to give it some context, and then the broken assertion, and it says the issue here is related to how missing data is represented in Python, and Pandas missing data is nan, but you've tested it against none. Here's how to adjust your test. And so it tells me to do this ugly thing down here, which is ugly. And it turns out that the thing it tells me to try doesn't work. So again, I paste in the error. I got Boolean value of NA is ambiguous. And then now it offers me a way to fix this. and I do it, and my tests pass. And so that's good. And now I have tests for my logic, and in particular, I don't really have an excuse for not writing tests. And so now all your code can have tests, like I always tell you it should, and your pair programmer, ChatGPT or whatever, can write them. You can also use it as a code reviewer, and I got into an argument with some people about this the other day, because some people think that trusting the LLM to review your code is a dangerous idea. What I would say is that if you have them, so the most dangerous thing to do is to have no one review your code. And obviously, you probably want to have humans review your code if you can too. But humans and ChatGPT is probably the best of all worlds. And ChatGPT as your code reviewer is better than having no one review it, because it'll suggest things, you can take them or leave them, or so on. So here's some code for doing breadth first search on a binary tree in Python. And actually, GitHub Copilot is writing most of the code. I set up this data class, but then I let Copilot write the logic. I looked at it, seems reasonable, mostly. And I said, okay, that's fine. And then I went over to ChatGPT and pasted this code in and said, hey, can you do a code review for this code? And when you ask your coworker to do a code review, they're busy and they got other stuff to do, and maybe they want you to do a code review for them in return or whatever. But ChatGPT is never too busy to do your code review. And it's nicer about code reviews than I am, for instance. So sure, I'd be happy to review your code, which is probably not something I've ever said. But it said, I like your imports and data classes. Your node class is simple and effective. Your breadth first search is appropriate, blah, blah, blah. And then it comes up with some code review points. One is that use Python 3.10 type hint style. Make sure the environment where this code runs supports Python 3.10 later. Okay, that's good feedback. Queue efficiency. You use a list to implement the queue functionality, particularly queue pop0 for dequeuing. While this works, it's not the most efficient way due to the O of n complexity of pop0 on a list. Consider using collections double-ended queue. So this is actually what I was curious about whether it would find, because that's sort of the obvious, not obvious, but it's sort of the biggest flaw in that code, is that it has some really bad performance characteristics of that. So it caught that. And then it also said, there's no error handling for cases where there is none. You might want to add a check for this. And then finally it says, add some documentation. So, it suggests those improvements. But then, it says the code is overall well written and demonstrates a good understanding of Python and breadth first search. With a few enhancements, it can be made more efficient and robust. So, it's, sometimes you get frustrated by ChatGPT's, even-handedness, but when it's reviewing your code, you sort of, you're like, oh, it likes my code. That feels kind of good. So this is actually, it's a nice thing to do. And I get that some people are reluctant to do this. I like it a lot. So I do recommend, getting it to review your code. It's not perfect, and it may suggest things that you may not like, and you may not want to take, but a lot of times it'll point things out that are actually pretty smart. Some people also don't like using ChatGPT as a subject matter expert, which in some ways it is, and that it's read everything that's ever been written, and in some ways it's not, and then it's like a dumb text regurgitating, hallucinating machine. I like to use it this way, with the caveat that you have to sort of use your best judgment. So, before I had this example of a model that takes a Yelp review and predicts how many stars that review is. And I mentioned that was probably not a good use case for generative language models, and that you might be better served doing it some other way. And so I thought I would take that to ChatGPT. So I want to build a machine learning model that takes as input the text of a review, say Yelp review, and predicts how many stars the review is. I can't decide how to approach this. Here are some ideas I've had. One, treat it as a text generation problem. So that's what we saw, in my little demo app. Two, treat it as a regression problem. So, take some text and predict a number. Hopefully it's between 1 and 5, but maybe it's not. Three, treat it as a classification problem, predicting which class is this, where the classes are 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, whatever. And, I asked it, what are the pros and cons of each approach? is there another approach that I haven't thought of? Um, and so, because it's been reinforcement learned to praise people, it says, this is a fascinating problem. Let's explore the approaches you mentioned. So text generation, it says pros are it's flexible and expressive, cons that it's complex, potentially inaccurate and overfitting. That's actually a weird one because we don't really have training data. The regression approach, pros are it's simple and you get fine-grained predictions. Cons are that you lose the categorical nature and it doesn't behave well with outliers. Again, I'm not sure that's a great con. But pros is that it's a natural fit, it's interpretable, robust. Cons that you lose the sense of ordinality because you have these 5 discrete classes that aren't really ordered, and it's not flexible. And then it offers up an alternative approach, which is ordinal regression, which is a regression that is used for predicting to an ordinal outcome. And so the pros is that it respects the ratings. Cons that is complex and has data requirements. I also, I also don't know if this is a real thing. Probably is, but I didn't check. Maybe it's not a real thing. Maybe it hallucinated it for me. So that can be a con as well. And so, ChatGPT has been, again, reinforcement learned to be very, very even-handed, and gives what I like to call, I call them America is a land of contrasts answers, because, when you're in 6th grade and you have to write an essay about like some aspect of America and you just list a bunch of stuff and then you have to make a conclusion, but you don't really say anything that merits a conclusion. So you're just like, in conclusion, America is a land of contrast. Which doesn't really mean anything. So, in summary, the best approach depends on your specific needs, the nature of your data, and the resources, blah, 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 blah. So it's it's not actually telling me what it thinks I should do, which is frustrating. But you can ask and say, if you could only try one, which would it be? And it says, if I only had to choose one approach, I would choose classification. Here's why. And so here, one, I agree. That's the approach that I would choose as well if I could only choose one. And it says, 1, it naturally aligns with the problem. 2, it's simple and efficient. 3, it's very interpretable. 4, it's robust. 5, it's flexible for improvement. 6, it's a good baseline. So, I agree. I think this is good reasoning. And I think, I personally would have gravitated towards this in the first place and not had to ask ChatGPT. But, it's reassuring that you can use ChatGPT as a sounding board in this way, and it's not necessarily going to solve the problem for you. Although I guess you could probably ask it, okay, write some Hugging Face Transformers code to do this, whatever. But it will help push you in the right direction, which I think is pretty great. And finally, you can use it as a presentation artist if you're, have to give some sort of presentation at a meetup or whatever. You can use it to make art for your slides while you, sit by the pool and drink umbrella drinks. So that's kind of nice too. It's a much higher quality of art than my presentations used to have before DALL-E 3 became part of ChatGPT. So, to sum up, generative models change quite a lot. I would say use them kind of judiciously, sparingly as solutions. If you can think of something that, this is a product that requires generative AI, then by all means try it. The barrier to entry is pretty low, but a lot of the stuff that you're going to do there, especially as a data scientist, is maybe, not that useful or not that exciting. And, maybe I'm wrong and it is, but where I would really encourage you to sort of invest your time and energy is adding them to your toolkit as ways to, generate ideas, provide expertise, pair program with you, give you code reviews, answer questions, because these are ways that will make you much better and much more effective at what you do. And if you don't use them, then you'll be less effective than all the people who are using them. So, I remember it took me a while to get used to like just going to ChatGPT and asking it stuff as sort of like one of my first inclinations. So I'd run into a bug and, I'd spend 30 minutes beating my head against it. And then I'd be like, why did I not just go ask ChatGPT? And I would ask it and then we'd figure it out in 5 minutes together. And so it really took me a while to internalize that's a way of working that I need to be doing. And by now I've kind of internalized it, but Yeah. So, if you haven't, I mean, I'm sure you've probably played with it to some degree, right? Like, asking it, what should I make for dinner? Or like, how do I stop my toilet from overflowing or things like that. But I really encourage you to think about how can I make this part of my toolkit for doing data science, for doing machine learning, for doing software engineering, because it really has a lot to offer you that way. And I, I'm not paid by any of the LLM manufacturers to tell you that. I'm just saying that's been, my experience and the experience of people that I've worked with. And so I'm, spreading the good word, if you will. So thanks for listening. And, I'll share the slides and the code and everything. And, you can share it with your friends or whatever. And so because I'm recording this, I guess you can't really ask questions, but yeah, I guess you can email me or leave a comment or something.